Wow, very cool. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to DevOps 2024 opening session. I feel like Stefan, right? Welcome to DevOps. Welcoming you. Happy because I get the first slot means you still have some room in your head for content, which is good. Usually after 2-3 days, people have content coming out of their ears. And we are here to talk about Spring Boot testing. So glad that some people are doing Spring Boot and some people are doing testing. I'm very proud of y'all. Who knows me here? People know me? Yeah, 1, 2, 3 hands. I can see you. Yeah, I can see you. So hi, I'm Daniel. I work for Broadcom in the Spring team, in the Spring commercial team, where I do a little bit of open source, mostly related to Spring security and security things. So Spring Security, Authorization Server, doing stuff like SAML and so on. And in the commercial team, I do, let's say, applied Spring. So we take Spring libraries, we build projects for them, or products with them, and then we give that to our enterprise Spring enterprise customers who can use this. Here are all my socials. Reach out. So you're at a conference, you have the great opportunity to come and reach out. I'm not bothered. I'll be happy. Interrupt me when I'm chatting with someone. I'm here to meet you all. If you're shy, or if you're watching this on YouTube, like, subscribe, here we go. Feel free to reach out. I get a question from the community about once a week. I always take time to answer. I like your weird and complicated problems. They help me learn new things. Okay, so the topic of the day is Spring Boot testing. And I have the great, opportunity to be here thanks to my friends at Kalios who sponsored this trip. So they're around here. Go talk to them. They're great folks. They like sharing in the community. I can see you. And they're the reason I am here. So we're going to talk about testing, but mostly Spring Boot testing. This is not a general talk about testing practices. So if you want to learn about how to test right in, say, any language, don't come to me. Go find some much smarter people, and you can go to YouTube. You look for, say, here, DevOps testing, boop, 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 right? And then here you'll have a bunch of people who are better than me and have good Wi-Fi, apparently. And you can, I don't know, so sort by view count. Great people, great tests. There are a few sessions you can look on the mobile app. They will learn you how to do the things right. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to give you the Spring Boot related tools to implement what these people tell you, like your testing pyramid or a diamond or maybe a inverted Dorito. I don't know what they use these days. So we're doing Spring today. I hope you use Spring Boot. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit of a tough session. The session is called 0 to Hero, so we have to start from 0. So it's very likely that in the beginning, you will know all of the things that I show you. This is fine. It will get deeper over time and more complicated over time, but we build the basis. So let's get cranking. We need an app to test, so of course, I made an app, and you can see by the name, it's a very original app, right? So run this, take a look at it. Localhost. So I have a to-do, and I can now go to DevOps. It's the best conference in town. And then maybe I can say, give talk. Have you prepared your slides? And then I don't know what I do. And then chat with attendees. This is what conferences are great for. Here we go. So a bunch of to-dos. When I add a to-do, it's a time leaf rendered backend. So when I add something, foo, it makes a post request. I get redirected back. When I complete, it does the same. Because I'm a little bit crazy, a little bit spicy, I have some JavaScript here, so I can unfold my to-dos either one by one or all at once. And then I can see the contents, and as you're seeing, there are no requests made in the process because we want modern apps. This looks very modern. And so to test this, when you go to a normal, you start your basic Spring app, you start on start.spring.io, and then when you make a project, say it has web, it has, I don't know, JPA and Postgres and so on, it usually gives you this test here. So an empty test that is annotated with add Spring Boot test and that does nothing. This is what I have in my project. So somewhere in here, hopefully to do with users, not this one, this one. So in here I have a test and it's empty and it does nothing. So if I run it, right. So everybody here who's ever tested a Spring Boot app has seen this. This is an empty test. It does nothing. So let's make it better. And so I think what everyone does when they make a web app with Spring and what they start with is they auto-configure MockMvc, and then they auto-wire MockMvc, this one, MVC, and then maybe let's rename this test. So to do MockMvc tests. And let's say add to do. Okay, and with this, they do the dance of importing static methods. So this one, MockMvc request builder. IntelliJ is very, very nice and very friendly. Tells me, oh, you have this to-do endpoint. So when I look at my to-do controller to know what I can do with this, so this add to-do takes a text and a description. So let's put some text. Param here, text. Hello, DevOps, and param description. This is fun, isn't it? Question mark. Okay, and so of course this can throw. So add the exception to the method signature, and then we do some verification. So we expect the status of this to be. So in MockMvc result matcher, status is found because it's a redirect here. And we expect the redirect URL to be slash, right? Yeah, that's fine. Slash, there we go. And then we can make another call, maybe a get this time to verify that my hello DevOps was added to the page. So to slash MockMvc, it doesn't know this one, MockMvc request builders. So get, beautiful, static. And we expect this time the result, the status, sorry, is found. No, it's okay. We get a 200. Hey, here we go. Perfect. And we expect the content of the request to be, come on, content, here we go, to be a string. So I'm not going to assert equality here because it's a big HTML page. So instead, I'm going to use contain string hello DevOps, right? And so in here, import static again, matchers, beautiful. And so this should work if I haven't messed up anything. Let's see. Right, green, first green test. Ooh, let's go. So of course, if I make it wrong, if I say, oh, this DevOps is actually in Spain, hola DevOps, and then I get it wrong, and I get a nice little error message that tells me, well, there's this giant string here, and I expected to contain hola DevOps, but the full string was this, and then we can see there's hello DevOps here. So nothing groundbreaking here. Hello DevOps. Nothing really groundbreaking. We're just, making curl calls or Postman. So this is equivalent to curl Postman HTTP requests. HTTP requests. A few things to note, though. So one, this add Spring Boot test here, the core of the implementation and the core of the magic is this extend with add spring extension.class. So this is this extend with is a JUnit concept. So this is something that allows you to register extensions to your JUnit engine so that it changes tests. It does stuff before the test suite start. It does stuff to clean up the test suite. And this Spring extension is the testing extension for Spring that is going to read all your tests and classes and decide which Spring application to start. So with the Spring Boot test, is going to start a Spring Boot application. If you do more things, so for example, if you add a configuration class here, configuration static class config, then it's going to pick up this configuration in your tests by scanning it. It's also the thing that allows you to do this auto-wire magic. So this is at the field level in my test. I can also auto-wire it here, MockMvc, MVC. So if I do this, this still works, which is interesting in the case I have multiple beans of a given type. So instead of injecting the list and going over the list of beans, the collection, I can here have qualifiers. So I want the bean qualifier. I want the bean that's called foo. I can inject it test by test basis. And so in here, this MockMvc is a bean that's created by this auto-configure MockMvc, but I can access any bean in my application. So in here, I can access, for example, the to-do repository, which is the repository that contains to-dos. And so when a to-do is added here, I can say assert that import this one. To do, no, it's called repository, count, sure, find all. Let's do find all. Find all has size 1, right? So there's one to do in my repo. I can verify on it. If there were multiple, then this one would be unhappy with me. And I can do stuff to maybe clean up between my tests. So in before each, so it's called setup here. I can do a repository delete all, right? So delete all the to-dos that are included, that are added in a test so that I start from a pristine state. Okay, so MockMvc, easy, make requests, look at responses. Here we have a web application that's doing HTML and a little bit of JavaScript. So it's a bit of a shame not to test this HTML interaction, especially if I have some JavaScript, right? I have my to-do.js that allows me to fold, unfold things, and maybe I want to test this as well. So the way to test this that not everybody knows is the web client. So new test class, again, Spring Boot test, again, auto-configure MockMvc, right? And we can auto-wire here a web client, right? And so this is not a Webflux web client, right? So if you look up here, it comes from org HTML unit. So in my build.gradle, in here I have this dependency. It's managed by Spring. This is in boot 3, 4, and up. The dependency coordinates have changed in framework 6.2. But basically it's the same thing. Just double checking. In the back, if you can't see, just like wave your hands like this, and I'll make the font bigger. Yeah, wave the hands. Okay. What do we do? Zoom 175. Is it better? Yeah. No more waving. Okay, amazing. So with this web client, what we do, again, we can do the add to do test. So add to do, and we do web client. We get, but this time instead of trying to post, right, we pretend to be a human, get page. So this gives me a page. This page is an HTML page. Cool. Yes, can throw. And with this HTML page, I can pretend to be a human. So it's kind of a little bit like Selenium, but more lightweight. So I can query selector. What does my page look like? Index.html here. Put it on the right. Yeah. Okay, so there's an add new to do form here that has a new to do input, a new to do description text area, and an add to do button. So with this, I can do, so we said new to do, and this is the text of the to do, and it's an HTML input, right? Then we have an HTML text area, which is the description, page, query selector, then new to-do description, I think. We'll see, otherwise it will fail, right? And then we'll have an HTML button, which is the submit or add to-do button. Page, query selector, add to-do, I think, right? And so in here, we can pretend to be a human and say, well, text type the thing, bonjour Devox. And in the description, we can type again. Let's put a now. C'est chouette d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. And then we click the button, right? And when we click the button in my browser, it redirects me. So this gives me a new page. Or I can refresh the page variable here because I don't need the old one. And so on the new page, I can now look at the to-dos. So maybe in the index here, the to-dos, what does this look like? So it's a to-do, and it has a data role text. And then another span, which is data role description. So we can say I want the to-do, and I want data role equals text, right? And so these are my to-dos, and from this I can say extract the text content. So I get the text of the to-dos, and then these are the to-dos, and we can assert that. There we go. This one, to-do get last is equal to bonjour Devox, right? So when I run this, if I got my selectors correct, this is the wrong test. So when I run this test here, if I got my selectors right, then I got my selectors wrong, then it should be green, it should be happy. So it says, oh, button click, there's no add to do button. So did I do a wrong selector? So the ID is add to do. Add button, not add to do, that's why. Okay. So, ta-da! First try. So in here, more interesting than scanning over the entire HTML, because if I got Hola Devox here, then I would have a much better error message, right? So instead of having the entire HTML page, in here it tells me, well, you got bonjour Devox instead of Hola Devox. And so as I told you, the cool thing about this is that it also tests JavaScript. So if this time I'm looking for the to-do, and then they have a data role description. So the descriptions that are foldable in my to-do list, right? In here, I can say, does any of these descriptions, is any of these displayed? So is displayed, right? And then we put in var. So description displayed. And assert that description displayed is false. Because by default, when the page loads, there's no description that is displayed. So it has a little bit of knowledge of what does it mean to be on screen, okay? And then I can click, I can do page, and then query selector. And I can't remember the name of the button that toggles everything. It's called toggle all, because I am a very original person. So toggle all, right? This doesn't refresh the page. This triggers a JavaScript action. Okay, cool. So then I can do this again. This description displayed. And so is it displayed now? Well, it should be, because there's some JavaScript that goes over all the descriptions and then unfolds them. So this test here should now return true. Is true. Okay, so hopefully. Not green. Ooh, what did I get wrong? Oh, I selected the button and I didn't click it. Thank you very much. So it doesn't work. Very good test. This is an HTML button. Click. So TDD, right? If I don't click, nothing changes. And if I click, first try again, it unfolds. So this is really nice. I stay in the world of Java, and I don't need any other dependency. So this is basically a lightweight browser implemented in Java. It's not Chrome, it's not Firefox, it's not Selenium driving anything. It's limited though, right? I can do JavaScript, but then, for example, these days in Spring Security, we're working on passkeys, so logging in with your fingerprint. This HTML unit thing does not support passkeys. So if you need a full-fledged browser to do more interesting stuff, this will not cut it. But for most use cases, this is good enough, right? And you'll see that you have options to configure it. And then when you look at this, so for example, it says set fetch polyfill enable. So if you want to run fetch calls on your page, it's actually faking it through this fetch polyfill. So there's a bunch of things, a lot of things that are not fully implemented, but quite close. So this is good enough for your basic tests. Okay, so now coming back to this MockMvc. This is called a MockMvc test because in here, the web environment that's wired in is called the mock environment. So this means my Spring Boot test is not starting a web server. And this we can see if I run this application again from start. So if I run the real app, it says your Tomcat started on port 8080. And if I go to the to-do list page here and I refresh a bunch of times, then I get a few logs that I made here. So I made a Tomcat login valve. Don't do this. This is just a demo. Don't log this way. Use the real tools. But this is a thing that hooks into Tomcat. So if you don't have a Tomcat, then these logs don't show up. And this is what we see with our tests. So if I run my tests here, right, run all the tests, and I look at the output. So this one says blah blah blah, completed initialization, started to do MockMvc tests. Nowhere in here does it say Tomcat. And I don't see the logs of the requests, right? I'm making a post to create a new to-do. I'm making a get to slash to get the list of to-do page. So there's features that are missing in this test. And if I want this to actually test my full stack, including a web browser, then I need to make a special kind of test. So I'm going to call it to-do Tomcat test. It also works with any other servlet engine you use. So if you use Undertow, Jetty, whatever, it would work. And so in here, you say this is a Spring Boot test again, but you specify the web environment. And so you have 4 options. Either none, saying, hey, this test, I don't even need a web environment. So I'm just going to test my repository, don't care about the web. Mock is the default, which works with MockMvc. And then you have random port and define port. So random port allows you to start the test, and then it will hook up Tomcat or your servlet engine on any available port on your machine, and it's random. And then define port uses your server.port variables. If you can avoid it, don't use that. Don't use define port because it tends to clash with other things that are running on your machine. You have to think about changing it. If you run multiple tests in parallel, it's a problem. So usually more of a random port type of thing. And then if we go to the web client, I'm going to steal my tests here. Boop. Do them again. I'm going to remove the description thing. Bonjour DevOps. And then here, change that to another language. There we go. Hola. DevOps. And then, qué bueno estar con ustedes. Okay. And so this here, IntelliJ, is already complaining and it's telling me, well, there's no web client bean in your context. This is because this web client was connected to my mock HTTP server. And I need something that connects to the real HTTP server. And so it doesn't know how to do this by default. So instead, what we do here is we create a brand new one, new web client. And I need to change the page. Slash is not a thing that exists, right? I cannot go to my browser and try and go to slash. So I need to go to localhost and then probably some port here, the port on which my environment is running. And so this port, you can obtain it by this annotation here in port, and it's going to detect which port your Tomcat is running in, and then put it in this variable here. And so hopefully here, if this runs, so when we look at the logs, first we see started to do Tomcat test, but before Tomcat started on port 64488. So there is a real Tomcat, and I can see my logs in here. Sometimes, if you want to do deeper tests or more integrated tests, this is important. For example, if you're using Spring Session with some databases and you want to serialize the session to the database, the mock context doesn't handle sessions, or it makes mock sessions. So you can't test your sessions with a regular app, with a regular Spring Boot test. You need this random port facility. Also, it has an interesting property, which is if I go here and I put a breakpoint, but I change this breakpoint to block on the thread. So this means my app will continue running, but if I debug this test in the thread that's executing the test, and only that one, it will be paused. So if I run this, it debugs, OK. And so I can see here my server port is 64505. And so that means I can go to 64505, and I get my app that is running in my test. Very useful because here I have the user in the test has typed. They have not clicked yet, OK? So if we make them click, and I go to my 64505, and I refresh, the thing that was added in the test is now visible in my browser. So I don't have to look at some HTML rendered, or like a raw HTML as text in my console. I can go and try and debug and see what's running in my application here. So it allows, when you have these complicated tests, it allows to see, OK, where did it fail? I don't need screenshots. I can go and watch this. OK, amazing. And so this being a real environment means I could do a thing. I could use any HTTP client I want. So I can do a REST client .create, not class create. This is my client, right? And so now I can do client.get, URI is localhost plus port, great. Retrieve, body to string, right? This is the response. And I can say assert that the response, I don't know, contains h1 to do. That's the header of the page, right? So if I'm more used to the REST client or the REST template or the Webflux web client test, then I can use that in my test here, targeting the real app. It is also possible, if you really like the style here, it's also possible to do this in the MockMvc world, but you need a little bit of work. So if I take my REST client test and I put it in my to-do MockMvc tests, there's no port. In here, there's just a slash, right? So this is the main page. So how does it know how to connect to this? Well, in that case, you do a REST client.builder, and then you're going to build. And the thing you change is you say request factory is a MockMvc request factory, this one, new, and you pass the MVC inside. And so this is going to hook into your application or into your REST client. And when you make a request, it's going to use the MockMvc stack inside. And so this should work locally. So if you're really into, assert tests and so on, then this is a good option. All right. So a little recap of what we've seen so far. So web environment.mock, the default for Spring Boot tests, is not a real web server, but it's good enough for the vast majority of use cases. If you need a full server running, and this is for more advanced stuff, so I mentioned session persistence, if you have custom logging valves, then you can do it with web environment random port. Try to avoid define port if you can. And then it's very useful for debugging, right? You can go and look at your page and interact with it and set it the way you want in your browser while you're trying to construct a good test. And then you get your port from the @localserver port annotation. There's also a web test client test REST template, which I'm not going to go over, but it's a REST template and a Webflux web client that are connected to the correct port already. OK. MockMvc, great for request-based testing. And then HTML unit with a web client is good enough for basic web testing. If you have complicated use cases, you use advanced features, you will need to drive Selenium, take Selenium to drive a web browser. I think there's a Selenium test, this edition of Devox. If you're writing lots of JavaScript, well, you're probably better off staying in the JavaScript world to test your JavaScript, right? So you're going to use one of the JavaScript test engines to drive a browser, so Puppeteer or Playwright or Cypress, or I don't know what the cool kids on the block use these days, but stay in the JavaScript world. All right, so we've gone over the basics. Any questions so far? All good? Take a sip. Okay, so my application here is fairly simple. It has web, it has a little bit of persistence, stores my to-dos in a in-memory database. So when I run all the tests, it takes a few seconds, maybe a second to start a test. It's fine. It's okay, for starting. But then when I get 1,000 tests, maybe it gets complicated. And maybe when my app becomes bigger and has more configuration, maybe it starts getting slower to start. So let's simulate that. So we make a slow bean, right? So this is an empty thing that doesn't do anything. So we'll provide it as a bean. And public slow bean, return new slow bean. Very good. Who says Java has boilerplate? And then how do we make it slow? Let's log a little bit. So we want the logger factory, get logger, get class. Cool. And we make it slow. So it's a snail, right? Configuring slow bean. And then when it's done, we're happy, done, exclamation mark. And then, ta-da. And so how do we make it slow? How do we make a bean slow? Any idea? Thread.sleep, excellent idea. Excellent, perfect. You should come and co-present with me. So let's sleep for 1 second. I love it. Okay, so this can throw, this is fine. Copy, oops, I'm going to copy the whole line. And then put it here, so 3 seconds. And then maybe for the sake of the future, I'm going to make this a field, sleep duration, all 3 occurrences in the field declaration. Okay, so we sleep for 3 seconds. So now if I run my tests, again, all the 3 tests, then suddenly it starts becoming a little bit more painful. Like configuring slow bean, done, boop. And again, Tomcat tests, configuring slow bean. But then the last one is really fast, which is a little bit surprising here. And when I click here, there's no configuring slow bean that comes up. In fact, if I come here and I open the to-do, it's called web client test, right? So if I take, or maybe the mock, let's take the MockMvc because it's simpler. So if I take the whole test here and I say, well, I want to duplicate it. And I'm going to call this one test, okay? And then I don't do anything. I'm just going to add a test that, say loads, right? Right. So I have 1 test. I'm going to put 2 tests, and then duplicate this 2 tests. Yep. 3 tests. So I'm adding more tests, right? I'm testing more features in my app, and I run again all the tests in my project. So 3 tests, unsurprisingly, configures the slow bean and it's slow. But you see the rest, they're going really fast, except this Tomcat test here. So what's happening? Well, remember when we went and visited what's inside the Spring Boot test here? This Spring extension is responsible for creating the Spring app that runs in your test. But it's smart. It puts it in a cache based on its configuration. And so these 3 tests, so there's 3 tests here, 1 test, 2 tests, to do MockMvc test, to do web client test, they're all the same Spring apps. So this one doesn't have an auto-wired inside. These have, but auto-wired, it's something that's in the app. I'm not changing the content of the app by doing auto-wired. So they're all the same. The Tomcat test, though, on the other hand, this one has random port. So it is substantially different because it adds all the beans it needs to create the running Tomcat server. So it's a bit slow. I get 3 seconds for these mock tests and 3 seconds for Tomcat. It's still bearable. But if you go and change these apps to be slightly different, so you say, oh, this one has an active profile, so maybe this one is for DevOps, and then maybe I say, I don't know, the toTest has, I don't know, properties. So we can say properties here, properties, DevOps, fun equals true. And then maybe the other one, so 3 tests here. Maybe this one we say it has a different configuration. So like a test configuration, class test config. So this will be added on top of my existing configuration. Or if I have a thing like at mockbean. So let's say we mock the repository. To do repository. So this replaces the repository bean in my app by a mock. It's complaining because in Spring Framework 6.2 and Boot 3.4, that's coming out next month, this has been renamed to Mockito Bean. So now all my 3 apps, they're different. And now if I start running my test, then 3 tests needs to wire my slow bean. So 1, 2, 3. And then the MockMvc is different because it doesn't have the profile or the Mockito bean. And then the one test is different because it has a property. And then suddenly you went from a fairly fast test suite to something that takes 15 minutes. So I often go and see this at customers who use Spring Boot test and don't know how to make it, how to maintain good hygiene in their test, and their test suite takes 15 minutes. If your test suite takes 15 minutes, how often are you going to run it? Not very often, or not often enough. And so then you're going to be developing, and then after a full chunk of feature is done, you run your test, and something is wrong, and it takes 10 minutes to find out, change something. So the feedback cycle is awful. So avoid creating many instances of your Spring test context if you can, right? So there may be legit cases where you want to do this. So for example, Tomcat tests, but you don't want to be like putting Mockito beans everywhere and like having 5 different test profiles is going to get costly. So you should avoid doing this if you can. So let's get rid of these because they're slow. And then this one too. And then we go to the configuration, and thread.sleep is back to a normal usage. So run this to make sure everything still works. But the takeaway for this, Spring Boot test is slow in the orders of a magnitude of a unit test, right? If I just create a Java class and I run a few tests on this Java class, it's going to take me milliseconds. If I create a Spring Boot context every time I make a test, it's going to take me 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds if my app has like millions of entities. And this, painful, you shouldn't be doing that. So avoid, when you can, avoid active profiles, Mockito beans, dirty contexts, stuff like this. Prefer if you want a single context and you want to avoid polluting the data in your tests, one thing you can do is what we did here in the to-do MockMvc test, right? So in here, I clean up my repository. So you can clean up your repositories for a subset of tests that are the same, and maybe create 2, 3 test contexts, but not much more. And so you want to reuse the cache context. This comes at the price that in here, so before each test, I delete all. So if I remove this delete all here, and in my web client, I'm going to assert something about the list here. Assert that to-dos has size 1, right? So in the web client test, if I run this test solo, it should work because I add bonjour devox and that's it. But if I run all my tests, since the web client test and the MockMvc test, they share the same context, they share the same database, then the MockMvc test adds a to-do, the web client test adds a to-do, and then suddenly I have 2 to-dos in my database. So I need to be aware that they tend to pollute each other if I think about it too much. The solution is not dirty's context. Avoid dirty's context as much as you can, because dirty's context will refresh the entire context, and it's going to be slow and painful. Okay, all right. So, of course, the solution to this, we'll do this after a little commercial fun tools break, which is test slices. So we'll look at test slices. But before we do this, I'm going to open the testing toolbox that comes with Spring Boot testing. Before we go into the tools, do we have any questions so far? All good? Not too fast? Still awake? Okay, so Spring Boot test comes with a bunch of libraries that we've seen through the tests we've done here, but we've not necessarily talked about. So first, it comes with JUnit that runs my tests. So I don't think in my build.gradle here, it puts the Spring Boot starter test, and it doesn't need to add JUnit manually. It's already included in the starter. It comes with Mockito, so I don't think we have an example, but when we did add Mockito being here, this in-term inside creates Mockito mocks. And it also comes with this assert that here, which is assertj, which is a library for making assertions. So there are actually two libraries for making assertions that are inside Spring Boot test. And so let's take a look at those. Let's say toolbox tests. Here we go. So these are going to be faster because I'm not going to do Spring Boot tests. So let's create one class for harmcrest tests. All right. So the first one is maybe the OG assertion library test. Harmcrest is fine. So if you want basic assertions, you say assert equals, and then, I don't know, 2 plus 3 equals 5. And so you can see here this assert equals comes in JUnit. It's basic, and it gives you a relatively simple way of testing. But now if I want to check, if a string contains another, and I need to make the code in Java and then just assert equality, and so I have bad messages. So instead what you can do, you can use assert that. And so let's say bonjour. Come on, bonjour Daniel, exclamation mark. And then in here, you can say contains, import me this, and I want to show that this one comes from matcher assert. So this one comes from Hamcrest. And so you can say contains string. So again, this is an Hamcrest thing, matchers contains string. Contains string Daniel, right? And so run this. So yeah, Hamcrest is fine, it works. If I put Maria here instead of Daniel, then, we expected a string containing Maria, but we got Daniel, and so there's no Maria in here. This is fine, but it's many factory methods or static methods that you import here. And then you compose them, and it's kind of not my preferred style of coding and testing in general. So I prefer assertj, but do what you want. So in here, assertj is fun. Assertj allows you to, instead of having these methods, it allows you to use a Fluent API to do multiple assertions and discover how you can check things by just doing dot in your IDE. So let's make a test that does something. So we have books, and books have a title and they have an author, right? And so now we have a list of books. Library, amazing. Import Java util. So we have books, list of we make a new book. So I don't know, we can do The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. And then we make a few books. So I don't know, the three-body problem by, I'm not going to pronounce Mr. Liu's name. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. American Gods, Neil Gaiman, and then maybe Hyperion, a classic, Dan Simmons, I think. All right, so we have a few books here. I'm going to wrap these so that they stay formatted I can read. And so with this, I can assert that, and then this time I want to import it from assert.j, so this one here, org assert.j core API. So I can assert on books. And this being a collection of books, then assert.j and the editor tells me, ooh, this is a collection, so I can do stuff on a collection. I can say, well, it has the size of 4. Okay. And then I can also like filter. Okay, I can filter on what? We're going to filter the book such that the book.author not equals, let's say, starts with. So if it starts with n, and then now, well, how many authors start with n? We have N.K. Jemisin and Neil Gaiman, not these two. So now the size of this is 2. And then maybe we can extract the text, the title, not the text, title. And then, well, we can say contains exactly now, it's what, the 5th season, close enough, IntelliJ, close enough, American Gods, right? And so I have this fluent style. Instead of doing assert that, assert that, assert that, I can do discovery of what I can do with my test by doing ... in my tests. It was a start, oh, because it's a capital N, to lowercase. Yeah, okay. Cool. So, and then again, I have helpful error messages. So if we say, if I get this wrong and I say this is Hyperion instead of American Gods, then it says, well, I expected 5th season and American Gods to contain exactly, and in the same order, 5th season and Hyperion, which is not correct. If I go back to this correct assertion, but I say I get the order wrong, because the list is an ordered collection. So I get my things in the wrong order. Then it says, well, I expected this to contain exactly in the same order this, but element at 0, we expected American Gods, we got the 5th season. Element at 1, we expected American 5th season, and we got American Gods instead. So in here, again, there's many things I can do. So I can say, well, I care about the content, but not the order, and so on with assert.j. So that's personal preference. Another interesting tool that comes with Spring Boot is the output capture extension. So in my Tomcat test, if you remember these, they produce logs. So they produce these user blah blah blah, user with IP requested, so on. And so the last log is here is with /fine. So in here, I can, if I want to check this log, one thing I can do is extend my test with output capture extension.class. This output capture extension is in Spring Boot tests, so it's something that comes only with Spring Boot, and it allows you to inject parameters here. Captured output is some output. So this is through the magic of JUnit extension. So JUnit extension tells you, oh, before everything, after everything, and also this parameter resolver that says when in your test you have a captured output, here's how I'm going to give you one. This is going to swallow everything that goes into system out and system error, and then I can make assertions on it. I can look at it and make assertions. So with this, I can say output, so get everything, or just get the output, the standard out, or maybe I want to check on the errors, but get out. And then maybe the lines, and I'm going to look at the last line, to list, last log line. Assert that last log line contains, it doesn't contain hello devox, it contains this other thing here with an emoji. Let's remove the emoji for the test. So this should work. Just make sure it's green, and then we can change it to see it fail. Cool. So if I change and I put the wrong status code here, then I do get an error. I can go see the error and says, well, I expected the actual, which is this entire log line, to contain this, but it's not in here, which is useful when you're doing, say, structured logs, for example, and you have very complicated structured logs with many fields, and you want to check that everything is included in your logs, then this is a good tool. Since we have a little bit of time, let's do something fun. Let's combine assert.j and this output capture thing. So these logs, they're always the same. And so I'm going to revert to this. We can make something. So, you know, assert.j has fluent assertions. We can leverage the assert.j fluent assertions and add our own assertions. So if I have complicated use cases and I want to check things on these use cases, I can make my own methods. So how do I do this? Of course, I go to ChatGPT. If the conference Wi-Fi allows, which it does, amazing, that's great. That's why you use a deep dive. Hello, how are you today? Would you mind helping me with some Java? Thinking, not sure, maybe, we'll see. Yeah, happy, cool, all right. So please write a class that takes a single string as a constructor argument. That string represents a log line. Extract the IP, the request path, and the status code from the log line. Okay. Say do not expose accessors. And what else do we want? Maybe just to be short, because I have in my head that I have to do a regex. So use a regex with named capture groups. All right. The log lines look like so. This, and then I'm going to give you another example. To do.js. Thanks. Right. And I don't even have time to go and grab a coffee. It thinks faster than I can brew a coffee. Creating a Java class, great. Crafting the class, Okay, log entry. Yeah, that looks reasonable. So let's see what we can do with this. ToString, well, why not? So in my test, I'm going to create this log entry as it told me. Great. Take this. And then import pattern, import matcher. Okay, so IP, anything that is not a backslash or a closing square bracket. I think this is a bit bizarre. I think what I want is digits and dots. That's it. And then the request, anything that is not backslash, again, like, are you drunk? But it's fine. So say any character, that's fine. And then status is going to be digits. Oh, that's actually good. Congratulations. And so we can inline this regex. We can make this a field. Yeah, I think that's better, right? Call it pattern, maybe log pattern. Okay. And I can make it static, I think, right? Okay, and then matcher.find, IP path, status, puts it as an int. I think this is good. All right, so why is this interesting? Because I'm going to call this assertions entirely. And I'm going to nest this class, actually. So let's make a static class log entry. It called it log entry, but I'm going to call it log line assert. So think for assertions on log lines. Okay, perfect. Log line assert. And so the trick here is I want to convert this to be assert.j compatible. So I can now extend abstract assert as the base class for doing assert.j assertions. There's a lot of already other abstract stuff you can do, including stuff about string. So you have abstract string assert. Our log line is a string, so I'm going to turn this into an abstract string assert, which looks like this. And then this one needs to super log line the string and the class. And then in assert.j, they tend to call this actual. Okay, cool. And so what does this allow me to do? It allows me to create a public logline assert has IP method, which takes an IP as a string. Great. And then here I can assert that IP. No, I don't want to create it. Come on, import. Yes, and then I'm going to qualify it. Cool. So that the IP that I capture is equal to the IP that's passed in. And because I want to be friendly to my users, I can change the message. So I can say expected IP to be, or maybe let's put it lowercase like this, to be %s, but was, and then %s. Yeah, and then maybe if we're friendly, we can say we can put the full log line and then %s. And so in here, so we expected the IP to be IP, but then instead it was what's captured here, and then we can put the actual, so the current log line. And after this is done, I return this. And so we can do the same for both the IP for both the path, so has path. And with the magic power of copy pasta, I can take everything that says IP and put path. And then has status code, right? So IP, status code. Or maybe I keep status. And so in here, this is an integer, or this is an integer, yeah. I'm going to use an HTTP status because I'm like this. And so status, we grab the value, which is the string value of this. Value, great. This.path, I think it called it request path. Request path, fine. Okay, so we have our methods, and now we can expose them. So we can say public assert that log line takes a string, actual, return new log line assert. Return this new log line assert with the actual, okay. And if I really want to get funky, I can extend assertions from assert.j. In assertions, this one here, yep. And so now in my Tomcat test, what's this .status code? Now in my Tomcat tests, I can replace the assert that here and say, I want you to import assertions. Assertions, there we go. Okay, and so, yeah, again, static, so this one, not the reference one. I don't know why it's not finding it. Assertions, is it static? Static, there we go. Okay, try again. Import static in assertions. It finds the wrong one, but I can force it, IntelliJ, do what I want. There we go, amazing. And then static import. There we go. And so this assert that log line, we can use now. Assert that log line, which, did I make it static? Log line, probably not. Oops. Well, let's see, last log line, and import static, okay. And then now I can assert stuff. I can say it has IP 127.0.0.1. I can say it has a path, which is /, and it has a status code, which is HTTP status OK, right? So instead of doing string assertions, I do structured assertions in my code, right? So this works. And if I get my things wrong, then if I put found here instead, then I get nicer error messages. So if I have complicated use cases that are always the same, and I do like these complicated assertions that extract stuff, I can put this in an assert.j class and then make that available to my developers, right? So we expected the status to be 302 because it's found, but it was 200 instead. Here's the full log line, right? And so you can even extend this beyond in your assertions here, this one. In your assertion here, you can even make a public, say, log lines assert. And so this one extends, this is a static class, extends not an abstract string assert this time, got it wrong, factory-based navigable list assert, log lines assert, and then it's going to assert on list of strings, which give you simple strings. And then for asserting on a single thing, it's this log assert that we did. And so now we can create a constructor. Cool. And so this takes strings. And so we can assert here log lines assert, the class, and then log line assert new. And then this can give us, if I want, public static as log lines with an S assert. And assert that, and I'm going to assert on the captured output. So this one doesn't clash with any other assert method. The string assert that string already exists, but assert that on the capture output doesn't exist. So we're going to return this one. And so we need to find which log lines we put here, captured output, get out, and then we get the lines. And then we're going to filter. We only get the log lines, so the lines such that log pattern, where are you here, this one? Here we go, pattern, come on, there we go. Nope, not the right one. Qualify, there we go, log line, pattern, matcher, we match on the line, and then we say only if it finds, to list. These are my filtered lines, so it's not super interesting, but filtered lines. But this means in my Tomcat test here, instead of doing this dance of like getting the output and then getting the lines and getting the last line because I want, now I can do assert that, not log line, just assert that on the captured output. So output here. And then we say, well, how many log lines do we have that look like this? And we can say, oh, well, they should all satisfy. What's up with this? That's the wrong one. Did I make this one here? Oops, assertions. Did I make it static? Yes. Log lines assert on the captured output. Well, let's qualify it. We'll see if it finds it. This one. There we go. And then all satisfy. So each line must satisfy assert that log line. Line has status 200, right? They all work, which is okay here. And then I want the last log line, and maybe I want this one to have the path slash, right? So I can write my assertions in a much more fluent way, which works for every use case you have. It doesn't have to be on strings. And if I get my things wrong and I say this one is to-do.js, then I'll get a nicer log output. All right, so if I get the test wrong, it says, well, we expected the path to be to-do.js, but it was slash instead. Amazing. Are you still alive? Yay! All right, so assert.j, fluent assertions, very cool. MockMvc tester, I haven't shown you this. This is cool. So Spring Boot 3.4, Spring Framework 6.2, MVC tests to do MockMvc tests. So here I do MockMvc, right? And so in this MockMvc, I do perform, and then I have to import this post, I have to import the status, I have to import redirect URL. If you use Spring Boot 3.4 and up, we give you a new class, a cool class called the MockMvc tester. Tester, yep. Not test, tester is better. Okay, cool. And so we can do something like, I'm going to call it MMT, MockMvc tester. Tester, and we give you an API that looks like the API of a REST client or a web client. So I don't know, I'm going to do get on the URI, which is slash, and then exchange this, and then assert that. And this gives me an assert.j style assertion. And so with this, we can say, well, it has the status OK. And maybe we say the body as text or as JSON. Body text contains hello devbox. So this is only when I create a devbox, but maybe let's put something that's in every page, h1, to do h1, right? There we go. And so it maybe does not contain hola, right? So I can do assert.j assertions on MockMvc without having to do all these static imports that IntelliJ never knows where they are and so on. So here we go. So it passes, of course, and if I change this to affaire, well, it's going to fail, and it's going to show me the string and say, oh, okay, this is wrong. You should have a to-do, but the string looked like this, and so on. Right? So this, we expected this to contain affaire, and of course, it's in English, so we have to do. So AssertJ, great library. We like it so much that now, instead of using Hamcrest in MVC, we give you MockMvc tester with the option of doing AssertJ tests with MockMvc. And the output capture extension is a nifty little extension that you can use to improve your tests on standard out and standard in. So you can ask an LLM to make this for you. And it costs $20 a month, and it's actually pretty good because I made it make a class, but like, nice. Could you please turn this into an AssertJ assertion? And so I'm pretty sure it should be able to do this. Understanding AssertJ. Many options. Okay. What does this look like? Reflection. Why would you use, why? There we go, blah, blah. And so this is not an AssertJ test. You are drunk. I want the class to make AssertJ assertions based on log entry. And so while you are fighting with an LLM, one thing you can do as well, oh, it's still computing. Ah, here we go. Yeah, that's not great. Maybe this. Still not this. Using reflection. Ooh, great. So while the LLM is failing at doing that, you can say AssertJ docs in here and be like me, like a boomer. I go, and in here you will have all the examples for everything, and how to make your own assertions, and how to make them available, and have many ideas of what exists. And so this one, not great. Still nothing. So no, you can use an LLM sometimes. Sometimes you can't. So maybe read the docs like you did in 2023. Okay. So it's been an hour. Do we have questions so far? Things that you're puzzled about or that you want to learn about? Yes? So why do I clean up in the before each instead of the after each? I'm not 100% sure the after each executes if a test fails. And I like to think of it, I want to start, I don't want to clean up after my tests. I want to start my tests on a clean slate. So my mindset is more like, okay, everything is clean. I start with a baseline, and no matter which test I add, they're all going to start with the same thing, even if the other tests don't touch this to-do repository. But after each is fine as well. It's going to run anyway. The after each maybe will save you for another class, but I'd rather have the other class clean up before its own tests, so that when it runs, the sequence doesn't matter. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay. Okay. So we've seen AssertJ, we've seen output capture. I told you I'm getting old. I need index cards now to not forget something. And so we've seen before the toolbox here, and before we get into the rest of the talk, we've seen that the Spring Boot tests tend to get slow. And the more stuff you load in your application, then the more tests you add, the slower your test suite gets. And if every time you do something, you add 10 seconds, then it's going to become unbearable. And so I told you try and reuse your test context, but Spring Boot has helpful tools for you to manage these test contexts to make sure they're small. So Spring Boot has slice tests. The most known one that lots of people already use is for testing your web, the web slice of your application. So not testing the repositories, not testing messaging, not testing, I don't know, method security, but only the web slice. And so the way you do this, instead of doing Spring Boot test in here, you do web MVC tests. With the web MVC test, you can auto-wire MockMvc tester again, MockMvc tester. I'm going to call it mock, because this web MVC test already has auto-configure MockMvc. And this web MVC test is going to do multiple things. So one is going to look for all controllers and all beans that participate in the web stack of your app. So if you look at the Java doc, it tells you here, I'm going to look for controller, controller advice, and JSON component controller. So anything that's annotated or meta-annotated with a controller. So if you have a REST controller, it will find it. And if you, I don't know, if you have filters or converters, if you have, a security filter chain, this will find it, and this will register it in the test context. It doesn't say anything about repositories, though. So in this MockMvc test, before I do any test, so we're going to do, say, delete to do. If I try and run this, so we've said it looks for controllers and controllers only. Our to-do controller here, to-do controller, not configuration, come on, to-do controller, this one. Our to-do controller has a dependency on a to-do service. The to-do service is an add service. It's not an add controller. So my web MVC test will not load a to-do service. So this will not even start. If I run the test here, right, it explodes quite fast, and it tells me, well, your to-do controller here required a bean of type to-do service, and I don't have one. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to give you. So if I want to make this work, I have options. First option is I could create one to-do service manually. So I create a configuration class here, static class test config, right? And so I can provide my own bean of type to-do service, return new to-do service. And so this here takes a to-do repository. I'm going to pass null. And so in here, this test configuration, the Spring Boot extension, or the Spring extension that's loaded through here, is going to say, well, inside your test class, there is a test configuration. I'm going to add it to the base configuration. And so I'm going to add this bean. And so now suddenly, my to-do service test starts. It's not going to be super useful if I do this, because this to-do service actually uses the to-do repository. So I'm going to have null pointer exceptions. So that's one way of doing it. So if I have test doubles that I want to use instead of using mocks, I can use this test configuration. I can also do Mockito bean. So it used to be mock bean, right? Now it's called Mockito bean in Spring Boot 3.4 and up. So to-do service. And so again, the Spring extension is going to scan my class and going to say, oh, you have a bean of type to-do service, and I'm going to make a mock of this to-do service, and I'm going to put it in the context. And now, with this MVC thing, I can now say MVC post. The URI is, so IntelliJ doesn't help me here because it's not up to date with the newest versions of Spring and Spring Boot. But if I post to delete exchange, assert that the status here is found, it redirects me to the main page, and the redirect URL, I can even do has redirect URL if I want, to slash, okay. Ooh. Put this, format it, right. So this should work, and now this to-do service being a mock, I can assert things on that mock. So verify in Mockito parlance. To-do service, I want to verify, import verify, that delete has been called with 42 because it matches the 42 here. Okay, so run this. And it works. So it tells me 86 milliseconds. We've seen that it takes a little bit longer than this because it loads the classes for the first time in the test JVM. If I run all the tests, not add to-dos, I want all the tests. Okay, all the tests. If I run all the tests, of course it runs first. Let's call it alpha. Pretty sure it's going to run last if I do this. Yeah, there we go. So alpha is here. So the classes will be loaded already. So you can see here, it's much faster. It only loads the web slice and nothing else. So I don't have my slow bean. So the snail doesn't show up in here. I don't have anything JPA related, so I don't need to scan for entities. I don't need to decide what to do, wire repositories, and so on. Just the web test. I can, if I want, slightly modify this. And like, oh, well, this is nice, but I'd like to also include the to-do service. Because in here, mostly I'm testing the controller, and my controller doesn't do much, right? To alpha, to-do, controller, this one. So my controller doesn't do much. I don't have much logic. I'm just testing maybe the binding names of the parameters and so on. So maybe I want this to-do service. So this I can do. I can import any bean in here. So I can say, also add the to-do service to my class. And so in here, the to-do service will not be a mock anymore. So I can mock the repository instead, the layer below. Repository, and then repository, delete by ID. So now I have a thing that has the to-do controller and the to-do service. I can even scope this. I can say, well, I only want the to-do controller here, right? So if I have 1,000 controllers, maybe I just want 2 or 3 to participate in my test. I can slim it down. And so it means, if I have 1,000 controller and I have like 2,000 services, maybe if I do a test with like 2 controllers, then I need to mock 2 services, not 2,000. So run this. And now we're testing against a mock to-do repository and not a mock to-do service. This is a Spring Boot provided slice test. So if you want to find out about the slice test, you can go to Spring Boot reference docs. And so in the reference, here, testing Spring Boot applications. In here, there's a list of all the slices you can have. So if you want to test, I don't know, Redis or JPA or GraphQL, there's a bunch of things that are done for you already in Spring Boot, and that should cover your use case. If you don't remember where it is, you can just type slice in the search bar. And so I don't know, testing Spring Boot applications. And so here we are. You go to the correct page. You can make your own though. So this is a way of doing slice tests with provided Spring Boot stuff. But if you're really, really sure about what you're doing, you can create your custom slice test. So the way we do this, we do a Spring Boot test, and we tell it which classes we want. So maybe we want the to-do controller and the to-do service, right? And then with this, then it's going to load these classes only. I'm going to add auto-configure MockMvc because it's not in Spring Boot test by default. So this to-do service needs a repository. I need to mock this repository. Mock keto bean to-do repository. Amazing. Test method. And so, I don't know, index page, something silly, or maybe, yeah, it has the list of to-dos. So we auto-wire the MockMvc tester, MVC. And so when the repository, come on, static. When I call find all on the mock repository, I return a list. There we go. A new to-do item. Hello, Devox. Very original. I don't need a description. This is fine. So, okay, cool. And then I can do MVC get and get the URI, not exchange, URI, which is slash exchange, and then assert that body text contains, or maybe let's start with the status. So has status, okay. And this will wire a simple test that has to do controller, to do service. It has a mock to do repository and whatever is necessary to make MockMvc work. So if I run this, this should work. All right, so it works. It's pretty fast, but there's a little problem with this. If I try and assert stuff on the body text, indeed, and I said, does it contain hello devox? And in that case, I run this, and it fails. Right? Why does it fail? Well, let's look at the error message. It says, we expected the actual, so the body text, which is empty, to contain hello devox. So the response is 200, and I have an empty body. That is bizarre. Why is that? This is because we're missing some stuff. My to-do controller in here renders some templates, and it renders these templates with timeleaf. So I need something to translate this /index into the index.html and have timeleaf eat the string of the end of the HTML and then spit out the rendered template. So that's not wired, because by doing this, I have created a configuration with just my classes. It happens that auto-configure MockMvc here will load a bunch of stuff for me. So MockMvc auto-configuration, security auto-configuration, and so on. But it will not load the stuff about timeleaf. And so if I want to get inspiration, I can go to the controller test, which I'm going to rename. There we go. And this WebMVC test, I can go and take a look at it. So what does this one do that I don't? It auto-configures MockMvc, but it also auto-configures WebMVC. Oh, OK, what's this? Well, it's an auto-configuration that brings a bunch of other auto-configuration classes. Message source, Spring Data Web, and timeleaf auto-configuration. Validation, HTTP encoding. So I only really care about this timeleaf auto-configuration. So I can go back to the controller test, to the custom slice here, and say, oh, OK, well, I know what I'm missing now. Auto-configuration, import auto-configuration, and I want the timeleaf auto-configuration, right? So I change my test to have, OK, I have this MockMvc, and I also have my timeleaf view resolver, and now my test passes, because it uses timeleaf. But if you want to create those, it gets complicated fairly easily, right? Because this is a simple test. If I want to do something with repositories, then I have to have, enable JPA repositories, entity scan, something to create a data source, something to wire up Hibernate. And so trying to get those to work is more advanced. So please use the default slices we give you. Only when you're very accustomed to what they do, you can go and try and use those. OK, so it's been an hour and a half. Before we get into, and we're exactly at the almost the half of the content I have. So let's take a break here, 15 minutes. Reconvene at, what time is it? So 10:52. Let's come back here at 11:05, and we get into more interesting slices with databases and stuff. Thank you. You came back. Good sign, good sign. I'm going to take a picture, and for the people who didn't come back, I'm going to hunt you through the conference. All right, before we get into another slice test database, most of your services will be using databases, so it's interesting to discuss that. Had a few questions during the break, which I think are interesting, related to slicing and context. So the contexts are cached for the duration of the test run. And by default, the Spring extension has a context cache of 32 elements, not 42, 32. So if you create more than 32 contexts, then the least recently used, so the oldest context that's not being used in a while, is going to be evicted. And so if another test comes in that needs the same context, it will recreate the context again. And so you can control this if you want. So this default context cache, which is an implementation of context cache, has all the hooks you would need to say, well, I need a least recently used, or like a frequency rather than recency. I can change the size. the reason why we don't have a big cache is that because your Spring Boot applications can get quite large. And so if you load 500 megs for every context, and you have 30 of those, then 15 gigs of RAM for your context is probably going to be a bit much on your machine. But you may have reasons to do it and change to fill your behavior. Clarify as well, these test slices, they create a context. So if you get into these WebMVC slices here, and you make a slice, just for this controller, and one just for that controller, and I have 1,000 controller, and I make 1,000 tests with a different slice, then I'm going to make 1,000 contexts. So I'm going to pay the few hundred milliseconds every time, even if it's not big, it's not seconds, but I have 1,000 things that take 100 milliseconds. Then I have 100 seconds. And so suddenly it starts getting slow. And if I have many of those, it's more than 32, then they get evicted, they have to be recreated every time. So the slice is not the answer to everything. It's just another way of creating a smaller test context, which may be useful in test, but it's not magic. It's just a smaller thing. And if I have thousands of smaller things, then it's kind of the same as having a bigger thing. OK, so context. So slicing, yep. We've done the web slice. So the reason why it's organized in slices in Spring Boot is because we want to load as little feature as possible. So just the web slice, so only the web-related classes, and so we don't have to load your database. Or only the database, so we don't have to load the web thing. Because if we do a vertical slice that does the entire app, well, it's kind of like doing a Spring Boot test. So it makes no sense to slice that way. For Spring Boot, it's not going to speed up things for you. It might make sense in your tests, but not for us. And so we've done the top slice, so the web slice. Let's do the data side of things. So we have a to-do repository. I'm just going to make sure that all my tests run, because I changed things during the break. MockMvc, beautiful. OK. So let's test the repository. To-do repository tests. And so the slice for this is data JPA tests. And so I can make a slice. I can auto-wire a to-do repository like this. And then I can make a test that says add to-do. So in here, I don't have MockMvc. I don't have the web layer. I don't do HTTP encoding, decoding, and so on. I just work with my repository. So I can do repository. I'm going to save a new to-do item. Hello, DevOps again. Wow, this is original, dog. OK, and then I can load, so repository, and then find all. I can wrap this and then assert that. Import static, use this one, fine. And then we say, well, this has a size of 1, and then I'm going to take the first, and I'm going to extract, say, the text. Right, and then is equal to, and then the text is hello DevOps, right? Ooh, come on, keep it nice so attendees can read. No. Yes. OK. So run this. So it's a bit slower because we do entity scan, we wire up, hibernate, and so on. And still not bad. So one might say, this is not super interesting of a test, right? What are we testing here? Because we just call save on the repository and find all. These methods are provided. They behave as we expected. So why could this be useful? So first, it allows you to test your entities. So this is an entity. It needs an ID. If I remove the ID here and I run this, so IntelliJ is complaining, and my test will complain as well, because it will tell me blah, 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 entity to-do item has no identifier. So if I have, if I want to test my joins, if I want to make sure that add formula here is loading something special from the database, it's already interesting. Also, if I have a query generation with data JPA, so if I do something like, I don't know, repository, find, to do item by text, order by text, descending, right? Something like that, then it becomes to bring in a little bit more logic. Even though this is text, it is logic, and so I can test that this behaves the way I want. But that's not what this JPA test is most interesting for. It's most interesting when you have advanced capabilities, potentially that touch your database. So for example, our to-do repository here has a add query for search by keyword, which is a native query. So let's test this. Search. And so if I want to look a little bit at this to-do repository, this search by keyword, it uses toTS query here, which is a Postgres-specific thing that does full text search. So if you want to test your Postgres data location thing, well, this is probably a data test is probably a good place to test that. So let's save a few to-dos. Save new to-do item, run a marathon. This is unlikely it will ever happen. Lol. Okay, and then maybe we go to DevOps. That's more like it. Okay, and then at DevOps I'd say show the to-dos app. Make sure it's running, and then we can do some groceries as well. Groceries, because we all need to eat. Let's make cucumber salad, soy sauce, sesame seeds, right? And then we can test our search by keyword. So instead of doing find all, hey, smart IntelliJ, wrong size. So search by keyword, and I'm going to search by run. And so the run happens twice. I have it here in the title, and I also have running. So in English, this is the same stem as run, so I should find both. So this has the size of 2, and we want to maybe compare by text again, because that's the smallest one. And so it contains exactly run a marathon, and the second one is show the to-dos app, right? So if I run this test, my current setup uses H2. So this is not going to work. Try it, but it's going to be quite unhappy with me. Very red, very not good. Could not prepare statement, syntax error, the famous, well-known code 42,000 syntax error. I hope you know that by heart. And so because I don't have Postgres, so this is not going to run. So let's add Postgres. The problem is my thing doesn't even run in prod in here, right? So search, DevOps. Oh, this is the test one. There we go, refresh. DevOps is great. And then search by DevOps. I have the same problem because my prod is running against Postgres. So when I have to introduce something new, I go to start.spring.io and I steal ideas. So I have JPA, I have Postgres. I don't want to be managing Postgres myself, so I want to put it in Docker. So I'm going to add Docker Compose support. Okay, so with this, I can explore the project and ask the fine folks at Spring, what do I need? So I need runtime-only Postgres and this development-only Docker Compose. Okay, good. Build Gradle. It's kind of like asking ChatGPT, but it works. Docker Compose, and then we have Postgres here. Okay, then what else do we need? Well, we need this compose.yaml. Okay, copy. And since this is a multi-module project and I don't want to run the Docker Compose in both modules and so on, I'm going to put it in not at the root of my project, but in here. And so it's not the default config. By default, see, it puts it next to your build.gradle at the root. I don't do this. I put it here. I'm going to call this compose stack to do app. And so I need to point Spring to this. Import the dependencies. Hey. And Docker compose file is now in my class path. It's compose.yaml. So now I'm just pointing Spring at this compose file. And since I want full text search, I can't use the default schema here that doesn't have full text search enabled. I'm going to use the schema Postgres that has all this black magic that does full text search. So here, schema locations is class path slash schema postgres.sql. Great. So hopefully, I can rerun my app. So maybe we didn't see it, but in here, container to do app Postgres is creating, waiting on it, and it's wiring it for me. So I don't have to change the change the data source. Oops. Here, change the username, the URL. The Docker Compose plugin or Docker Compose dependency, when I run my app from IntelliJ or from Gradle or Maven, is going to put all the right data sources in the right place, connected to whatever is this in this compose.yaml file. So this is already done for me. So when I go back here, now my devox is great, and also persisted to a DB. Yep. Groceries, ... and then go chat with attendees. I love Devox because Devoxians are awesome. Y'all are awesome. All right. And now I can search by Devox, and I only have 2 apps. So my app is connected to a Postgres that's running in Docker here in Docker Compose, and I don't have to manage it. My tests, though, they don't work anymore. So this to-do repository test, my test, even this one that used to work, doesn't work anymore because... So this one is going to tell me, well, by default, I try and replace the prod database by an in-memory database. So this is done here through auto-configure test database. So it looks for H2 or Derby or any in-memory database and then replaces the database my prod app uses with a test database. And since in my build.gradle, since here I removed, so what would be just for a test runtime only, since I remove com H2 database H2, it was saying, well, I can't give you an in-memory database because you don't have the dependency. And I don't really want to add this, because if I add this, it's still going to fail because we use the schema Postgres and H2 doesn't understand this. And so maybe I use a different schema, and then maybe I have to mock stuff, and it's not super interesting. So the answer to this, you've seen it, is Testcontainers. So who doesn't know Testcontainer here? Well, a few people, yeah, OK. And who uses Testcontainer in their tests? 30% of the room. So if you can, it's great. You should be using it. If you can't, I'm sorry for you. So instead of having a Docker Compose for my tests that I run only in my tests, I would use Testcontainers. So people here are mostly familiar, but what's happening? Go back. Oh, it's clicking. No, what is that? I don't know what's happening, but this is fine. OK, so we were about what? 30? No, 20? Hey, here we go. Testcontainers. So Testcontainers, testcontainers.com. Testcontainers.com. It's originally a Java thing. It moved to encompass other languages, but there's a hint in the name of the company that created Testcontainers, right? This is not Go. I don't recognize Go here. So it has most modules for Java. And so I need a database. It will be packaged in a container for me by people who know what they're doing, and I don't have to think about it. So if I need Postgres, first I have Postgres, but I also have PostGIS if I'm doing spatial stuff, timescale for timescale DB. I need a Kafka, I need a Redis, I need a, I don't know, AWS local stack, I need Google Cloud emulators, they're here. I need OpenID. We have Dex. We also have Keycloak. I don't know why it doesn't have OpenID. But all these containers are packaged for me, and they have a Java API to launch them. And Spring loves test containers. It loves it so much that we can go and add one more dependency here. And we say test containers, right? And we can see what's different. So first, we have more dependencies. Spring Boot test containers. Also, org test containers integration with JUnit. And org test containers, the PostgreSQL Java API for creating Postgres containers. So again, put it here. Refresh. And while this is happening, we can inspect the project. And there are a few more things now in my tests. So first, there's the basic Spring Boot test now uses this import at test container configuration. And so I can go and steal this test container configuration, copy. OK. This I trust. Test containers configuration. Replace. Change the package. Amazing. OK. So this creates a test configuration. So a configuration that will be used in test in addition to whatever configuration you use in your test slice. And this provides a bean of type PostgreSQL container. This bean is annotated with service connection. So service connection is the way for Spring Boot to say, well, I need a URL to connect to a database. I need a username, I need a password, and so on. Test containers tend to create containers on random ports. So if I create a port that changes every time, how do I connect my test? Through the magic of this annotation. So for supported container types, Spring Boot testing will say, this is Postgres. I know how to take the port of the running container, the user of the running of the database name, and put it in your app. OK, great. So then I only need to use this. So in my to-do repository tests, I can now import the test containers configuration .class. So here, I think it fails by default because data JPA test really wants to give me an in-memory database. So it doesn't know that test containers is here. So I need to tell it, well, it's fine, don't worry. Auto-configure test database, and don't replace the existing database. Just use what I provide you. And now, the test should pass, and it should pass with even with the full text search. So when we look at the logs of this, you can see test containers version 120.1. Here's the Docker host connected to it. So maybe you connect locally, maybe you connect to a remote Docker machine, maybe you connect to Test Container Cloud. And then it says, well, I'm going to create Postgres, and then I'm going to create Ryuk here for test containers, which is their orchestration container. So it's a container within your Docker env that will spawn the other containers. And so if we rerun this test, but this time we look at our running containers, watch-n1 docker ps. So for now, there's only the Docker Compose Postgres that's running for my prod app. And if I rerun my tests, here, not all, to do repository tests, there we go. And then here we'll see this Ryuk container and then Postgres that comes up, and then it goes away after the test is gone. Great. So now the test slice makes a lot of sense. I can test native Postgres stuff. Very cool. So it relies on this service connection thing. But service connection doesn't work for everything. So if you go into the Spring Boot docs, Spring Boot testing, yeah, OK, fine. So if I look for service connection here, service connections, it will show me, OK, here's all the things that I know how to connect to your app. So ActiveMQ, Kafka, JDBC, so Postgres is doing JDBC, Mongo, OpenTelemetry, Redis, Zipkin, etc. But maybe you want containers to represent other dependencies that don't work out of the box with Spring Boot, and just adding at service connection would not do anything. So let's create one more. So we're going to have a generic container this time. So any container, right? And not MySQL, I want nginx. Return new generic container of nginx, great. And then maybe we expose its port 80, because maybe I put some JSON files in there, and I want this to represent my external service. So, okay, I need the port of this to be wired into a thing that represents the external service. So let's do external service test. So Spring Boot test, fine. And then import the test containers configuration, not class, right? I do a test method, has external service port. And so where is that service port? Let's say it's in a value here. So here, external dash service dot port equals -1. Maybe it could be the URL. We don't really, doesn't really matter. Int port. Okay, and so we assert that. Come on, assert that. You can do better. Yeah, let's go. The port is greater than 0. So in here, nobody injects external service port. So this is not going to work. If I run it, it's going to tell me, well, we expected -1 to be greater than 0. It's not the case. Ooh. Error creating bean, blah, blah, external service, required of type int. Oh, this is a unclosed bracket. There we go. Come again. So it starts with Postgres and nginx. And we do get -1. So we want this value to be injected. Its service connection doesn't know about this external service. So what I can do instead here is provide this port as a property. And the way we do this is, for example, here, we say this is a dynamic property source. And this dynamic property source takes a dynamic property registry, right? I'm going to take my container that's created, container, right? And so before I return it, I'm going to capture the port that it has when it starts. And so with a registry, I can now say, well, add a property that's called external-service.port. And how do you get this? Well, you do container get map port, or maybe get first map port if there's only one. So this says, when the container has started, go grab the port. So it needs to start first. But only when it started, this is executed. Go grab the port and put it in external service.port. And so now, if I go back to the thing that's called external service test, I can also maybe system out, eyes, the external service port is, and then plus port. Here we go. And so now, by doing this, I can connect anything through properties, anything from test containers into my app. So if I look at the details of this test, external service port was 50,864. If I rerun it again, I get a random port, so there are no clashes. So 50,800 something. Here, right? Different every time. Okay, so we have dependencies. We can mock, or we can use integration tests with real dependencies that look like my prod things with test containers. If I run all my tests, of course, everything that uses a database will fail. Why? Because they don't have this test containers configuration. So the MockMvc test, the web client test, and the Tomcat test need also the test container configuration. So to do MockMvc tests, so this one, I need to auto-configure, import the test containers configuration not class. In the web client test, this one, I think. Not this one. Web client tests, this one, yay. So in here, I need also to import the test containers configuration so that my beans are available for everything, and then same for the to-do Tomcat tests. Ooh, thank you. Wrong class, wrong class. web client. Even before that. Test configuration. Thank you very much. No demo effect. Thank you. And in here, import again test containers configuration.class. Right. So now all my tests should work, but I have a little side effect. Some may call it a problem, but let's see. I run my tests and I look at my containers. And so as Spring Boot creates context, it's going to create me a Docker and an Nginx, and then the Docker and an Nginx, and then the Docker and an Nginx, and now I have 6 containers, and then at the end it cleans up. So why is that happening? This is because my, what is this? This is because my configuration class here exposes a few beans. And so these beans are created every time a new context that uses this configuration is created. So every time I make a new context, one is going to be slower because it's a new context, but it's going to be slower because I have test containers. It's going to be using a lot more memory. I have 2 more containers. So Postgres and Nginx start quite fast, but some containers, if you start keycloak, it's going to take you 10 seconds. And so then you're adding 10 seconds at every test. So one of the suggestions that the test container folks tell you is to use singleton containers that you reuse for all your tests. And the way you do this is you use their utilities, so integration JUnit and test containers with the add test containers here. And then you make this Postgres container, you make this a field, not self, question mark, right? And you make it static. Right? And then here, this one you annotate it not with bean, with container. And so this will create one static container that is started by the test container's machinery, and then our bean cheats. It only returns a reference to the static container. And so we can do the same for the generic container here. I'm going to call it Nginx container, and then we make that field, yeah. Field declaration, and then we make it static, right? Container, right? Okay, so still doing the same bean Spring stuff, but we're delegating starting and stopping the containers not to Spring anymore, not to Spring Boot testing and Spring testing, but to test containers. And so now if we run the tests and we look at the containers again, then it should start the test container machinery, Ryuk, Nginx, Postgres, then runs multiple tests and kills them. So that's useful. I have less memory usage, less resource, easier, but now I used to have test contexts that were isolated. Now all the test contexts share the same database. So you get into the same problems of like dirtying your database when you're running tests. So trade-offs. You have to find what works for your use case. You could have multiple configurations with different test containers that are started on different cases. It's really on a case-by-case basis. So again, test containers, great to set up at start.spring.io. If you don't know what you need, just don't go. You don't even need to go to the web. You can go to start.spring.io. We have great auto-configuration support in Spring built in for Postgres, OpenTelemetry, Redis, Rabbit, Kafka, whatever. And if you need dynamic configuration, you can use this dynamic property source. You can also write your own auto-configuration module with your own service connection details so that service connections is supported. So I did this Dex module here, This I did myself. And so if you want to learn, where's this, where's this, how does that work? Well, in here, I'll show, no, that's the project. I want the GitHub. Where's GitHub? Well, it's here. You can write your own thing to support test containers if that's important for you. So it's fairly easy, a couple of classes. And so if you're writing a library, you have a custom container that all your team use, well, you can give them a Java starter that will add service connection support so that they don't have to do the dynamic property source things. And singleton pattern trade-offs, right? So you reuse the same containers. If they're stateless, that's cool. If they are stateful, maybe, maybe not, depends on your tests. Okay, not bad, not bad. I think we're on time. So, any questions so far? Yes. Does test container work out of the box with Docker alternative? I think they work. I'm not sure they work out of the box with Spring Boot. I haven't tried, so let's jam on it after the session if you want. We'll see. Hey, we can ask our friend. All right. Does test containers plus Spring Boot testing work out of the box with Docker alternatives, e.g. Podman? And then I'm preparing the response. Are you really, really sure, or are you making this up? Asking for a friend. Let's see. Installing for Linux user. This out of the box is just yeah, okay. Maybe. Let's see. It's always good to ask a second question because clarifying doubts, confirming accuracy, clarifying support because support. Yeah, okay, let's go. Apologies for any confusions. I don't know, man. He doesn't know either, so we'll find out. The only way to find out is to actually do it. All right, so take a quick break from the Spring Boot whole app testing, and let's peek into the toolbox again. So I think one of the interesting things we can show is Awaitility. Who has heard of Awaitility here? 30% again. Is it the same people using test containers? Okay, so Awaitility, very cool. Class Awaitility. So this is an external library, Awaitility tests, that's poorly named for non-native speakers. And so what does this do? It allows you to test asynchronous processes without writing thread.sleep. So let's say we have a static class and we have an async process. All right, and then this one has a boolean is complete equals false. This is totally thread safe. Trust me, I'm an engineer. There we go. Oh, come on. No, it doesn't want, so engineer. What are you doing? Why? I am lost, I can't do emojis. Okay. Engineer. There we go. Perfect, perfect. Use your imagination now. Reset font size. Okay, so this has a public void start, which returns a new thread. And this thread does something very thread safe again, and then start. And so what do? We do thread.sleep. See, yeah. And let's do a random sleep. So new random, cool, yep, import. And so we sleep for a duration of millis because we're polite and we tell you what the unit is. Random.nextInt between 500 milliseconds and 2 seconds, right? Of course, this can get interrupted. This is fine. Engineer, okay. I want this to give me a fire. Hey, there you go. So if it fails, it's fine. And then if it completes, is complete becomes true, right? So after something between 500 milliseconds and 2 seconds, the process is complete. So in our test process now here, we can do new async process. This is a P, and then we do P.start, and then assert that P.isComplete is true. Okay, so with this is going to fail because we start and then we just check immediately. So it's less than 500 milliseconds. So we expect this to start and to fail. Sorry. So we expected the complete, but it was not complete. So when we first tried to do this, we did thread.sleep here, very shamelessly. We know it's at most 2 seconds, so this should be a good approximation, 2 seconds, right? Right, truly fine, okay. And so in here, this should succeed. 1, 2, green. If I do it again, 1, 2, green. Hey, see, first try. But that's not super cool because I'm taking 2 seconds every time, and most of the time it should be less than 2 seconds. So, well, then you start doing like, oh, while not p is complete, then you sleep, and then maybe of millis, 100. But what about timeouts? Right? How do you handle timeouts? Then you're going to put timeout here. It becomes very messy. So, if you like Fluent APIs, like I do, you can use awaitility dot, not the shaded one, awaitility.await, and then at most, we're going to wait for at most of seconds, 2 seconds, 5 seconds is long, and then we're going to poll every, say, duration of, it really doesn't want to give me the right ones, every 100 milliseconds, and then until. So you can do a thing that gives you a Boolean, or if you like assert assertions, you can do until asserted. And the asserted is, this indentation is driving me nuts. There we go. Until asserted, assert that p dot is complete is true, right? And then we can make a variable. Let's observe this a little bit. So this occurrence complete. And then we say, let's do a new atomic integer, starts at 1. This is a counter, just so that we can, inside our closure here, we can print some stuff. Test. Oh, here we go. Polling, try number, and then %s, got complete equals %s. And so we pass counter.get and increment, and then the complete, right? Print f, and then put a new line. Here we go. So with this, when I run my test, it's going to poll every 100 milliseconds, try, and after 1 second, it got complete true. So if I try again, then this time, after 500 milliseconds, I was lucky. I didn't have to wait for 2 seconds. Try, great. But now if I say this is, instead of 2 seconds here, I put 1 second, then sometimes it will fail by timing out, just like this, right? So we tried about 900 milliseconds and then didn't have to do the last try. So we expected the value to be true within 1 second, but it was false. Also, we can also tell it, well, you know, you're waiting for stuff for at most 2 seconds and polling every 100 milliseconds, but we know this doesn't start for at least 500 milliseconds. So if I don't want to be polling too much, I can also poll delay, duration, and then after 500 milliseconds only do you start polling, right? And so run this. Well, this time it waited for 500 milliseconds. Then did 3 unsuccessful tries and a 4th good try. So we got about 900 milliseconds in our tests. So 500 plus the 4 tries. Cool. So thread.sleep, do not use thread.sleep. Do not write your own timeout. This is included. You don't even have to pull another dependency. It's pretty cool. It has lots of, you know, stuff, retries, and so on. Okay. 42 minutes. 42 minutes. I want to talk about many things, but I want to show. So I have some Mockito stuff under the belt, but I assume is everybody familiar with Mockito? Yeah, like anyone not? So just one important thing about Mockito: record, not regret, static class, and we have a greeter. And the public string greet, string name, right? Returns hello plus name. Yeah, beautiful. Maybe let's remove the end. Okay. And so with Mockito, we can mock this class and make it return something else. basic or like sequential calls, we're going to say. Sequential calls. So we can mock a greeter class, right? Put it in them. Oh, dude. Nope, not create. Come on, come on, come on. Dun, dun, dun. Maybe the .var is updating the intelligence in the machine. So this is my greeter. By default, if I assert that greeter .greet anything here, by default it returns null, right? Is null. So it will give you for objects, it will give you null. For a collection, it will give you an empty collection. For, I don't know, optional, it will give you an empty optional, and so on. So sensible defaults. And then we can say, so this should work, right? Boop. Okay. Then we can configure it and say configure multiple calls in order. So we can say when greeter, come on, right? When we call a greet with any string, any string, come on. Yeah, there we go. Import. Then we can return bonjour Daniel. Then return hola Maria. And then return hello Stefan. And then throw. Right. So I can do in order. I can tell it, hey, this, return this, then that, then that. So we can do this many times, anything. So the first time is going to be is equal to bonjour Daniel, and then hola Maria, and then hello Stefan, and then assert that thrown by. Yeah, assert that thrown by greeter. So this greeter.greet, greeter.greet, anything. Third time, fourth time, it fails. Anything, I don't know, messages, boom. Right. So I can configure, what's up? Oh, message is a matcher, my bad. Is equal to, boom. There we go. So you can configure Mockito to do, not just return the one thing, maybe, sorry? Ah, Stefan. Oh yeah, there's Stepan. There we go. Thank you. And so you can configure it to do more than this, and then you can even configure it to answer. And so you can configure it to look at what comes in before returning. And this is very powerful. You can then answer here. I'm reverting to French now. Then answer. And it takes an invocation, and invocation has arguments. So the first argument is a string. I don't even need to cast it. The name. So when it's called, I'm going to extract the name. If name equals Daniel, return bonjour Daniel, or maybe I don't even use the name. Salut, ça va? Else, return, are you enjoying? Come on, I can type enjoying Devox and then plus name, right? So then I can make it fake more stuff based on the inputs. So assert that greeter, the greet, Daniel is equal to salut, ça va? And then Jeroen, is that how you spell it, Jeroen? Hey, cool. Is equal to, are you enjoying Devox Jeroen? Right. So if I got my strings correct, then you can do stuff like this, which is very powerful. And so again, there's many other things. You can go ask ChatGPT if you want some nonsense, or you can go to the docs. I'm making fun of it, but it's usually pretty good. And the docs more, boop. Then the main reference documentation will show you everything it can do, including including one of my favorite, deep stubs. So say we have a REST client create our client. Okay, and then with this client we do get, and then the URI is going to be http example.com/foobar, and then we retrieve the result. We get the body as a string, and then this is the response, and then assert that response resp is equal to this is fine. Fire. Oh, so good. So of course it's not going to work because example.com is a reserved name that doesn't give you this type of response. So we want to mock this instead of using a real client. So we do a mock of a REST client, not class, not create class. There we go. This is our client now. And so we need to configure it. When client.get, then return. Oh, what do we return here? Well, this is a request headers URI spec. Okay, a mock of a request headers URI spec.class. And we need this to be configurable too. So this is this request headers URI spec. And then, oh, well, when request headers URI spec dot URI with any string and so on. And so many mocks to configure. And if I add headers and authorization and so on, it's going to be a mess. So instead, what you can do here is pass some arguments. So in here, you can pass some mock settings to configure Mockito to tell it how to create your mocks. And one of them is returns deep stubs. And with return the deep stubs, we can do here, instead of doing just a when client.get, we can say when client.get, and then URI of any string, and retrieve, and body to say only for string.class, then return. This is capital. This is fire. Hey. So with this, I don't have to do mock. I just do my mock call, and then everything is stubbed along the way. Very cool. Usually, I try not to mock REST clients when I do stuff like that. I try to use a test container, but sometimes you may need to do that, and you have a Fluent API you don't control. You can mock it easily with Mockito. Yes. I don't know what the difference between deep stubs and returns mocks is. Let's see, returns mocks. I think returns mocks probably give you a thing that you can't configure in one stub like this. So let's try it. Returns mocks. Here you go. So I think the configuration is not the same. So for some reason, it gives me a thing that probably returns a mock that returns a mock that returns a mock, and in the end I get a null. But I can't configure it, whereas with the deep stubs, I can say, oh, here's the calls that it looked like. And you can do crazy stuff, right? You can do, here I'm using any string because it's easy, but this is an argument matcher. Argument matchers, and you can say arg that, and then you can make your own matchers in here. So this is an arg, and I say, oh, arg dot starts with, or this, I need to tell it's a string, but if it's a string, if it starts with, I return this. If it's that, I return, if it ends with foobar, I return this. So you can configure in many ways that make your tests much easier and much smaller. Okay, Mockito. So awaitility, don't use thread.sleep, even if ChatGPT tells you. But maybe it depends, I don't know. And then know how to configure Mockito. Mockito's great, it's very useful. You should be using that. Okay, before we dive into the last two sections, any question? Yes, hand in the back. Awaitility, yes. So you're saying awaitility 93, there was a line 93, I guess. This is pretty good, yes? Right. This one here. Yes. So this until asserted, the way the thing it does is it looks at this, and then if the assertion if your block here returns or throws an assertion error, it catches it and retries after polling. So this is for with assert_j, but you can also use until and just return a thing that returns a boolean if you don't want to use assertions. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Last bits. So I think it's interesting to look at. We've talked about test slices and about how having different properties tend to change your configuration, your context, your application context, and so your test context. Sometimes you do want to test your configuration properties, and you're not going to test that with Spring Boot tests. So in here, I have a completely uncorrelated to-do properties that has nothing to do with nothing because I was out of imagination at that point. So my app can be configured with a to-do and has a list of profiles, and each profile has a name, and then it can have either an internal user or a GitHub property. And so I use a lot of custom validation annotation I made. So this, like these profiles must be unique by name. So if two profiles have the same name, it fails. The user profile has this one-off exactly, so it has exactly internal user or GitHub, but not both or not zero. So if I want to test this kind of thing, I don't want to do a Spring Boot application because it would fail if I put something wrong. So instead, we can make a new test to do properties tests. Yep, amazing. And so test, no, not JUnit 4. Let's go, let's go, let's go. So valid, let's start with valid. And so we can create a new to-do properties, right? So this one takes user profiles. Let's start list off. Okay, import class, and then in regex, fine. And then in here, well, this is a user profile. So we can create a new user profile, and then this one has a name. So let's call it first. And it has a new internal user. Fine, and the internal user has what? It has an email, contact@garnier.wf, and it has a password, and it has a first name, and then it has a last name, and it has a phone number. No, just kidding, I'm not giving you that. There we go. And then it has no GitHub, right? Okay, beautiful. Then I'm going to duplicate this one, and this one is second. Oops, second. This, I want this to be mostly null, and then a new GitHub, and then my GitHub handle. Okay, beautiful. These are props. If I wrap this to avoid formatting, okay, this kind of looks like something reasonable. With this, I can test my validation by calling the validation directly. So get the validator from the validation static class, obtain the validator, var validator, and then I can assert that validator.validate the properties, my props. Come on. Let's use this one for now. So explicit type, this is, let's use this so we can see the type of that. Validate, and then this is a set of constraint validation properties and to-do properties. And I'm going to say, well, this is empty. Okay. So multiple things. First, this is yuck. There you go. No, not cool. Second, we've learned how to do cool assertions. So let's do cool assertions. Remove this one, and then import static method, and then validation result assert that is empty, and then I have things I can test here. So this one in that case it's empty, but if I do an invalid one, so missing the test. There we go. No, come on. No, it really doesn't want to duplicate this. Oh my god. Still not that. Still not that. Still not that. There we go. duplicate. So if I do an invalid test here, the password is missing. And so has violation for property. And so now it's profiles 0 dot internal user dot password must not be blank, right? So I can write. So if I'm going to do lots of configuration and I need to test this configuration, I can write my own assert.j stuff. So that fixes that is nice. It helps you, and then you can inline this validate because you don't really care about the type anymore. But you can also do YAML. If you do your application YAML configuration in YAML, then you can use a YAML mapper builder. Then this one I use kebab case. That's my style. That's how I jam property naming strategies dot case, and then I'm going to make it discover the name of the fields based on the parameters. Then build. This is an object mapper, but it reads YAML object mapper. And so instead of doing what we've done with these awful nested objects, we can object mapper dot read value from some string. So in here, profiles and name first. I want to GitHub ID, I think ID, and then name first again, and then I'm going to do something else. Oops. Devox. And so now I have two properties of the same type, so this should fail. So if I map this to to-do properties, class, var, these are my props. I don't know why it indents it like this, but it's fine. And then we can assert that. And then we need to validate, so let's put this validator as a field. There we go. Validator.validate the props. And then has violation for properties profiles because the name is there twice, right? So if this is right, then this works. And look at this test. You can make this a field too, right? Poof. Perfect. Look at this. Beautiful. Yuck. Beautiful. Yuck. Beautiful. And since it's beautiful, we're going to put some stars here. Oh, yeah. Here we go. Amazing. So if you do many, many variations and you're providing a YAML interface, then probably, use YAML. And then one last tiny bit about configuration is my properties here have their own configuration file to do properties configuration. So in here, I have a configuration class that turns these on, and they just look at the properties and print something in the console. And if the name of the property is Devox, I do boom. Okay. So if I want to do an integration test for this, first, one thing I can do, class integ test, I can make a Spring Boot test that has only the to-do prop configuration class. Right? So I make a very small slice, and it just works without web. I can even turn out web here, a web environment, none. Right? So I have very few things loaded. And so I can auto-wire any bean that's in my config, including the to-do properties, props. So if I want some sort of smoke test, then I can do this, is valid, and then we want to assert something on the props. So props dot get profiles, get first, get, I don't know, internal user, email. We want this to is equal to contact at Garnier.wf. What's up? Required a collection of, oh, it's the wrong, assert that, of course. Let's see. Take those. This is validation, result, assert. Okay, cool. And then import this. in assertions. That's fine. Okay, so we need to pass some properties to this one. So there's two ways of doing it. We can do a profile. That's a classic. So active profile, we could say this is integ test. Or we can pass properties here, but then they're in the properties format. So if you have deeply nested stuff, then you need to do to-do profiles, to-dos, to-do. Ooh, this is a string. Ah, that's why. So to-do profiles, to-dos maybe? I don't remember. To-do, yeah, profile of 0 dot name equals foo, and so on. So I could type it here, and then it shows. But if it's deeply nested, it's a bit of a pain. So instead, you can use a profile, and then you put your own files in here, resource directory. There we go, resources, and then a new file, application.yaml. Yep, and then we name it integ test, I think, application-integ test.yaml. And so in here, I can do to-do profiles. It's a name. It has, I don't know, first, and then it has internal user, first name, Daniel, last name, Garnier-Moiroux, and then email, contact@garnier.wf, and then password, XXX. Is it smelling like burning, or is it just me? Okay, I have to finish before the cinema catches fire. Hurry up. Fine. Let's finish this. So with now my properties test, they load this integ test here, and so they should give me the correct properties. So this is for testing the valid case. It's gonna take 50 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds, something like this, because it's very small. And so I don't have to test with the full context. And what if I want to test failures? Well, in that case, if I put something wrong in my integ test here and remove the password and I run again, then the test, we don't even get to the test because the Spring context extension is made to create valid Spring context. So this explodes before I can validate anything. So if I want to test failures, one thing I can do is create a new Spring application builder. And then which classes do I want here? Well, I want a to-do configuration class, right? And I want no web, none, right? And then I can, this is my, and then I can pass it a profile if I want. So profiles, right? So I could do integ test failing. If I have many tests and I have to put this in many files, it's a little bit of a pain to manage my test files. And so I like to do it inline. But warning, use at your own risk. So I'm going to hack this one to pass it properties inline. So I can say var props equals a string, right? And so I can write my to-do. Is it to-dos or to-do? Can't never to-do. So to-do, and then to profiles, and then name equals devox. So this one should blow up. GitHub, and then to ID. So this is not allowed, this devox here. And so I want to pass this. How do we do that? I use the internals of Spring Boot. So a loader dot.load. Wait, there we go. Yeah, and then I load this from a. I'm going to call this one inline because it's from the test. From a new byte array resource, so I can take the props as bytes. So I load them inline. So this is clearly hacking. These are property sources. And so then I can create the environment in which Spring Boot will wire the app, or Spring, and then I can add the first property source here. Boop. Okay, and so in here I can pass the env with this, and then I have my app builder, and I can assert that app builder, but that this throws actually. Assert that thrown by app builder dot run. There we go. And then is instance of, I think this is a bean configuration bean configuration exception or something like that. I don't remember, but just that it throws an amp. And so this, you can hack many, many things by looking at the internal. These properties are public, but they're not documented. So you can use, but at your own risk. But if you have 1,000 tests for configuration, this is cool. Find it in the repo. You can make a little util loader. That's great. OK, last bit. Validation, unit tests, milliseconds, really fast, very cool. Use YAML or use whatever you want, but like constructing these use objects, I'm not sure. For integration testing, you do add Spring Boot with classes, creates a very, 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 very tiny context that just gives you what you need. And for failures, you can't do it with Spring Boot test or the Spring extension, so use Spring application builder.run. Any questions? 1 and 2, no hands, I don't see hands. Good. Last bit, yeah, oh, hands, many hands, yes. So the question is, when is testing properties useful? Well, in here, in this example, my properties, they use like these custom validators that says, oh, you cannot have both internal user and GitHub. This is not the framework. This is a business logic rule that I implemented. I happen to implement it through annotations, but you could do after property set or something like that. And so these properties are not Spring Boot properties. They're my custom properties. So for example, in Spring Commercial, we have a package product for the Tanzu platform, which offers SSO. And it federates to, it basically creates ID tokens, but the identities are managed in somewhere else on the cloud. So, and maybe I talk to this cloud in LDAP, or maybe I talk to it in OpenID Connect, or maybe I use SAML. And so now I have a configuration surface with like 3 modes. And I need to make sure that when SAML is configured, then it doesn't take precedence over blah, blah, blah. Or when I have both LDAP and a database user store, which one comes first? And so I need to be sure that the validation I have on all these complex properties is correct. And so in that case, it might be, if you make a product that is very configurable, it's worth testing the properties. If you make a microservice that uses only Spring Boot properties, it's no use, or it's usually not useful to test the properties. You can trust the framework. Does that answer your question? Cool. All right, so the core of this talk is not to give you all the details of how you can test different parts of Spring. So it was focused on Spring and Spring Boot, but not like Spring Data or Batch or whatever. But since I'm a security guy, I'm going to give myself a shameless plug here. And I know that 75% of Spring users tend to use Spring Security. And so let's take a look at testing security methods. So I have the same app, or like a similar app, let's say, but with the users. And this one, containers coming up. This one has, you have to log in to see anything. And so you can log in with a username and a password. And you get the to-dos that are saved in the database. Cool. And then you can also log out with an upstream identity provider using OpenID Connect. So in here, I can log in as admin@example.com. Ooh, what is happening? No. OK, fine. I'll touch ID. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, OK, that's good. Beautiful. I don't care about 1Password for the password, which is absolutely not password. OK, cool. Login. And so admin to-dos. OK, just an excuse to have security. If I want to test this with users here, I have tests. And let's create a new test to, let's say, security tests. So again, why is it top level? There we go. So again, here I would do a Spring Boot test, or maybe even a WebMVC test. That's enough. And I would import my security configuration, because my security configuration is a bit special. It has many beans and it does different things. Okay. And so if I run a basic test, so index page, I can test with it with auto-wired MockMvc tester. MVC, yeah. And so in here, if I try and go to the main page of MVC, get URI is / exchange, assert that, and then assert that the status is found, right? And that redirect URL ends with login, right? Because I'm not logged in. Login. Oof. There we go. So if I do this, this is the basic. I'm not logged in. I try to connect, and then it redirects me to the right thing. What's up with that one? We're missing a Mockito bean because this is a slice test, so the service is missing. Okay, fine. Mockito bean to do service. Here we go. So in here, main page, I get redirected because I'm not logged in. If I want to log in, I could use a web client and then go and navigate to the login form, type the username, the password, get a session, but that would be really painful. Instead, the first thing we can do is have with mock user here. And the mock user is going to be Devoxian. So this is an internal user or user details, and they are called Devoxian. And I don't have to do anything else with this here. My status will be OK. And then the content, or body text contains h1 to do, right? I see the main page when I'm logged in as Devoxian, right? So try again. Amazing. So with mock user, I can fake a user and I don't have to think about it. But what happens if I try and add a to-do? So again, I'm using my mock user here. And if I do mvc.post and the URI is /to-do, and then the param text is hello devox, and then the param here is description, and maybe the description is wow, this session was so good. I'm going to rate it 5 stars. Yeah? Okay, wrong star. If I put the wrong emojis, you're never going to give me 5 stars. Okay, post, to do, exchange, assert that, redirect URL, has status, let's say found, and then maybe I can verify that the Mockito service and so on, but just that it's found, it doesn't throw away. What do you think happens if I do this? If it works, it fails. It fails. Why? No, not read-only access. We're using Spring Security, and Spring Security has the habit that annoys you every time, but it's very important. It enables cross-site request forgery protection. So we can see that with my application. Let's see here. We can enable it to view that. So if you have a Spring Security problem, if you've seen me speak before, you know that the magic trick here, Spring Security Ninja, oh, wow. No, Ninja, here we go, come on. Yeah, whatever. Is logging, level, org, Spring Framework, security, trace. Voila. And so we would see our tests fail. So if I run just this one, so it does fail, as we expected. And in here, in the trace, invoking csurf filter, invalid csurf token for blah, blah, blah to do. So again, if you use a web client, you would get your csurf filter in the page, and you can click, and it works. But you can also do magic. We give you stuff to configure your MockMvc with csurf. And this is in the security MockMvc request post processor. And so this injects a csurf token, so I don't have to think about csurf. Try again, to do, and it works. So with these security MockMvc request post processors, you can do MockMvc tests without requiring a full web environment. Same like we could log in with, what's it called? With OpenID. So this mock user here is an internal user, but we can also support OIDC if we want OIDC login. So I remove this mock user, and I have a bunch of other with here. Security, request, post, processor, this one. In here, I have OIDC login, OAuth2 login, digest, etc. So I can do OIDC login, and then configure the ID token, ID token dot claim email is equal to devoxian, or like attendee, yes, at devox.be. Amazing. And so when we're doing this, we can verify, import, verify that the to-do service has been called, add to-do with like hello devox, and then attendee at devox.be, right? So the right parameter is passed, and I don't have to have a full browser. I don't need a test container for this. It just runs and modifies the request slightly so that it works out of the box. Okay, 5 minutes on the clock. TLDR, Spring security testing works with MockMvc. It's great. With mock user allows you to pass a user that has the name you pass. You can also create your own test user detail service if you want more than the name, say you want the email. And then these security MockMvc request post processors, who said Java was verbose, are great for configuring your MockMvc, passing tokens, passing if you have a resource server, you can pass a token, and more. So it's cool. Go check the repository. You'll have what you need. Any questions around security? Why is it so complicated? Because we have to fail when it's not secure. Your data leak only happens once. Sorry about that. All right, that was it for the talk. If you want the repo, go check it out. There are many examples, many other things we haven't detailed. Reach out to me in person, grab me in the hallway, in the tram, on the internet. And some plug, Thursday with our good friend Alina, we're going to talk about migrating Spring Boot apps to GraalVM. So come and check us out if you like this style of presentation. And last but not least, right, feedback. I hope that's the right one. I think it is. Give me feedback. You know, I take the what's it called? I take the stars. It's cool, but if you can send me an email, chat with me, tell me what was great, what was missing, what I could do better next time. Please take your time, tell it to me. I will get better. Thank you for your attention, and go grab a delicious scrap sandwich.
Initialize Genesis